The most annoying thing that can happen to any chess player is when you reached a totally winning position, but then you accidentally stalemate your opponent.
Yep. Oh!
And here's what happened when the biggest YouTuber on the planet, Mr. Beast, tried to checkmate Nakamura's Lonely King.
Just having fun.
Oh no, 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 no!
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
I'm gonna give you 3 simple tips so that you never end up like that. So here's a very common situation, somewhat similar to Mr. Beast's game, where you have a complete dominance in terms of the amount of material that you've got, and you only need to checkmate this king. So how do you do that? Here's the first piece of advice. Keep delivering checks with every move that you play. Alright? So in this position, for example, the very common error for white would be to try to create a ladder checkmate where white plays queen d6, aiming to go queen e7 and then queen to d8 and checkmating black in that way. It's all good, but the only problem is queen d6 results in an immediate stalemate. So what should you do instead? Well, keep delivering checks somehow, anyhow. Even if you don't do it in the most efficient way possible, sooner or later it's going to result in a checkmate. Here's another common situation. It's actually also taken from the real game. It was white to play here, and white pushed the pawn forward, promoting it into a queen. Check to the king, so black king moves, and white decided here to promote yet another queen with queen on d8, and once again, that was a checkmate. So here's another piece of advice. If we look back at this position, by the way, you see that white cuts off here and cuts off here. That's why it's a stalemate, so the king has nowhere to go. Now let's take it here. Let's just think about this position for a second. Usually prior to this, your opponent had a couple pawns just as well. So probably white wiped them out with his rook going forward and, like capturing pawns. So let's try to recreate the situation that was a couple moves back. It could have been something like this. And in this position, there is no point for white to try to go after all these pawns and capture them all. Instead, just leave them there. Do not capture all of your opponent's pawns, and then you're never at a risk of a stalemate. Now if white plays all the same moves, f8 promotes the queen, promotes another queen, now there is no risk for white, because black has a whole lot of moves that he can play there on the queen side, and white will have a bunch of time to put together that checkmate. And the third piece of advice is just to know common stalemate patterns and avoid them. One of the very common, probably the most common one, is this, when you're going to have a queen versus a lonely king. And in this position, how do you play if you're white? And it's very natural for white to try to move the king forward and then, checkmate black like that. But it's a stalemate right now, so it is a draw. And actually, any move forward of this king will result in a stalemate, which is kind of crazy. Now, what should you do instead? Well, when you've got this queen, you don't have to corner this king completely. All you gotta do is to cut it off on the last rank, and that is it. There is no need for you to move this queen any further, okay? So after that, the only thing you gotta do is to approach with your king, your opponent's king, and that's it. And wherever it goes, it's gonna be a checkmate. Here's something similar but slightly different variation of the same thing. Again, a very common thing. It is black to play, let's say, and very often white tries to win by cornering black's king. So they try to keep chasing the king to the corner of the board. And here, if white goes queen to f7, the final move was a fatal error that resulted in a stalemate. So instead, again, as I said earlier, you don't have to corner the king. It is enough to just cut it off on the last rank. Then it can never move away. So let me even move it a couple moves back. So here, there's no need for white to bring the queen somewhere here. You just advance your king towards it. And if it goes right, you go right as well. If it goes left, you go left as well. And after that, you will create a very simple checkmate. Almost anyone at some point of their chess experience have probably checkmated his opponent like this. It's very natural for white to do it that way, because in this position, that seems like a logical move to maintain the guard of this pawn. Because if the king moves elsewhere, the pawn will be lost. But king d6, as you've guessed it, is a stalemate. So in this position, it's just useful to know this pattern, okay? That if you've got these kings like that with this pawn, it's a stalemate. So instead, white should have just, moved his king towards this pawn, capture it, and then promote queens and win the game that way, but just did not put the king right here. Another dangerous thing for you to create is to keep your rook on g7 where your opponent's king is on h8. You can see that the king has no moves, and all that black's got to do here is to get rid of this rook by sacrificing it. Again, it's a super common stalemate tactical pattern. For example, if right now white is worried about this pawn and wants to push it forward, it looks like white almost won the game, but again, black only gotta get rid of this rook. So rook takes f7 leads to a spectacular stalemate, because however white captures this rook, it's gonna lead to a stalemate. And here's a puzzle of the day for you. It is black to play, and if you can find a good move for black, please write it down in the comments below. Just to clarify, white's pawns are moving this way, and so here we are, this side is black side. A stalemate pretty much always occurs in an endgame, but if you want to improve your middle game skills, feel free to check out this free masterclass where I'm teaching you how to develop your attack in a middle game so that hopefully you can win the game prior to an endgame. Wish you all the best, have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.